Hello, good afternoon. How are we doing?
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. Today I got Alessandra on. What are you? You have a lot of titles, but what
I
do you think
do.
you're? Spiritual mentor, healer, Reiki,
Yeah, so I do all of that,
minister?
but I I consider myself right now. I don't really have a specific label, but I would call myself mainly a spiritual advisor, a spiritual counselor, and underneath all of that, I am a certified psychic medium. I'm a Reiki master teacher and healer, so that's level 4. And then do what else do I do? I'm an ordained minister. I have a wedding coming up that I'm doing in the fall. A lot of fun things. There's a lot of fun things coming up, and I don't really know exactly what. That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean,
That's a good question. Like what am I?
spiritual advisor, spiritual guide.
Yeah, I think a spiritual
Helping
advisor.
people know themselves and move forward, right?
Yes, exactly,
What
exactly.
actually that's a good thing. I think we can jump right into that. Is with the weddings, marriage and relationships. Anytime I post about relationships, it just goes crazy because, what
Yeah.
do people want so much more now is relationships are a massive focus. Sort of the process or the ceremony as you said you're going to wed somebody, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I just did one back in May as well, and in comparing that, I've realized that the process is pretty similar yet unique because for me, and usually the people that ask me to wed, they see it the same way. It's like kind of a God pairs people up. So with the right minister, with the right pairing, it just kind of all works out. So we have a similar view of what marriage is. And it really is a divine union. It is so much more than getting permission, quote unquote, for this marriage. It's beyond that, like the way they would see it in a religious sense, or people see it in a religious sense. And it's so far beyond just a physical coming together. It is completely and utterly a divine unit, merging of energies, divine masculine, divine feminine energy, not necessarily biologically. It could be either one biologically, but coming together to create a new whole. So two wholes coming together to create almost a trine, so to speak, with the divine.
Yeah, right. It's like masculine and feminine coming together to create God, right?
Yes,
God is masculine and feminine energy, right? And that's like the
totally.
union of that. And I think a lot of people don't, they misunderstand what marriage really is because it's like a lot of people just check a box, and it's an initiation, it's a higher commitment, and it gives you, it really shifts your reality. Now, I'm not married, but I can see where people that don't people in general that don't respect the sacredness of something, it always falls apart, right? So it's like they don't fulfill their purpose in that next level of their life, and then people wonder why. Oh, it's been 2 years and we got divorced. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yeah, because when you're getting married, you're supposed to do more. You're supposed to produce something good for more people than just you. It's not just a check a box. It's not just entertainment and say, oh, I have a husband, I have a wife. That should drive you to that next level of power and what you do with that. There's a responsibility that people they're missing right now.
I think it's marriage is a personal development. It is a personal journey. So, for instance, I've seen people either stay in a marriage that is not healthy or force themselves to either get engaged or to marry because that's what they think they should do at this point. Their families are excited for them, whatever it may be, all of these other aspects. But what is so important is that you're not just marrying to appease other people. If you are not marrying this person because they on it, you it's meant to, you just know when it's right. You just know, and there's really no other way to describe it. That doesn't mean that there's no work to go towards it, but there is this inner just knowing, this inner knowing, and without that it's tough. But if you don't know that, going meaning if you're not awakened to that going into it, that's almost the lesson on the other end of things. So I minister to people. Well, I wed people literally, but I also, a lot of my clients, I've seen this in a lot of my clients. And what we do is we funnel in and focus on you, and we basically deconstruct all of the problem, all of the noise, all of the opinions, even your own inner critic, everything else. We isolate it, and it's almost, we put it in its own box, so to speak. And think of it almost like a chain, like a link. We do one link at a time until we free up everything. So once we take everything apart, you realize, wait a minute, this is the right decision for me. I should move on from this marriage, or I should give it another try, or I should marry this person, or I shouldn't marry this person, whatever it may be. Kind of getting to the nitty gritty of it is something that people overlook so often because they don't even realize that that's something that needs to be done, or that's even an area to look at in life, if that makes any sense.
So what do you think the main issue is, right? Like if somebody wants to progress in marriage, either before or after, where do you think they're the most stuck? Like, what would you say would be the core issue for somebody who wants to either develop, their goal is to get married, or maybe they're having issues post marriage? What would you say would be a core issue?
Yourself. A disconnection from self, I would say. I would say it's
Yeah.
a disconnection from living for other people, not you. It's that lack of self-worth, lack of unity, lack of inner unity, lack of wholeness on the inside. All of these broken pieces, living for other people, lack of awareness of how your internal system works, meaning what do you want? What do you deserve? What do you have to overcome in order to get what you deserve? Are you ready to overcome the shadows in order to make it to the net? There's so much to look at. And that is a huge, it's like Pandora's box, as you know. I can see, you know exactly what I'm talking. The shadow work, like once you start opening it, it's like, you can't unsee the light, but you also can't unsee the shadows once you open that box. And I think
Yeah.
a
Once you
lot of
know,
people just don't want to open it. They think it's easier, but usually at some point in life, they're
it's
forced to, one way or another, at least
That's a
try
good
to
point though,
get
because it's once you have an awareness of something, there's no really turning back. So
that.
the
Mm-hmm.
best way to do it's like everything's a paradox. Everything's kind of, I like to say, like, if you want to do anything good in life, just do the opposite of everybody else, right? It's like if
Mm-hmm.
you think it's hard, it's probably not as hard as you think.
Mm-hmm.
But I like what you said. It's like it's not like, hey, we got to solve this 100% of the issue all at once. You said like it's a link in a chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like piece by piece. And I think that's where a lot of people stop themselves with anything, any type of goals they have, is because they're like, look at this big goal. Like, it's like climbing a mountain. They're like, oh, I can't climb that in 10 seconds. It's like, no, maybe I'll take you, I don't know, 10 years. Maybe it'll take you 5 years, whatever it is. But like, it's just the link in the chain, and like getting each piece, and each piece can have exponential growth beyond what you ever thought was possible. Right?
Totally. Actually use in my practice, I use a very similar metaphor. I use a couple different ones, but the one you just said was the mountain. So like when you are standing right at the foot of a mountain and you're looking up, that shit looks massive. That looks like it's hard to even gain the momentum and courage to even get started because of how big it looks. But if you go back and you look at it from a much bigger picture, you can see trails, you can see paths, you can see more of what's on the other side. You can see more of the bigger picture than when you are pressed up face to face with said problem. So when
Yeah.
you take a step back, it's looking at it from the point of view of your higher self versus looking at it from the point of view of your human self. And the goal is that balance. And I think a lot of people miss that balance. And a lot of people are looking too much through the lens of their human self. So when they're looking at marriage and they're looking at relationships, they're trying to tick off these boxes, but they're not looking at the big picture a lot of the time.
Yeah. I would say, if any partnership should improve your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't just justify where you're at. And a lot of people are looking for comfort and just saying, oh, I want, there's an irresponsible saying of like, oh, you should just accept me for me. It's like, okay, but then you're going to get whatever level that you're at. And that's
Right.
fair. Right. But
Right.
if you want better, you have to work towards that. One thing I like to kind of dive into, there's always the what, but the how, right? Because we both
Mm-hmm.
have tools, we have healings, there's a bunch of modalities we have, right? And a lot of people look at, like we were talking about before, a lot of people look at the spiritual stuff and go, okay, cool, that's cool, or maybe it like ticks a box, like, oh, okay, that sounds whatever. But it really diving into the how and how the modalities actually affect the individual and help them, progress and transmute what they have. Because this stuff is, when you do it, when you actually experience it, even clients that aren't practitioners, guides, healers, teachers, once they actually do it, they go, "Oh, that's what you meant."
Yeah,
And I like to
totally, totally.
one of the, a lot of people, I typically work with a lot of guys, and they ask, some of them ask a lot of questions. I say, listen, you just got to do it, right? Go read the reviews. There might be something that says like, okay, cool, I can see myself like that. But another question I ask all my clients post sessions I do with them, I'm like, hey, if I would explain 100% of that to you before we did this session, would you understood what I was talking about? They're like, no. And every
Right,
single one says, now I know because I felt, I experienced it. And then they see the fruits and the results. Right.
right, right, right.
Then, then this like intangible thing becomes very tangible and just a normal part of
Yeah,
life, you know?
there is definitely a bridge from the 5D into the 3D if you want to look at it that way. Just because wording it that way, personally, I think it makes it more accessible to understand the different levels of reality. But for instance, I was talking to my brother, and my brother, he's my younger brother, and he had to grow up really young just like I did. He had to learn a lot of lessons early on just like I did, mature quickly like I did. And he has a lot of questions that people ask themselves, in their 40s, their 50s, things that, as you know, people that are awakening earlier on in life start to question. And it's that dark night of the soul. Life's not making much sense to you anymore, things like that. And I remember a couple years ago, we were talking about this. He was stuck at an extremely, extremely toxic job, like on Wall Street, very toxic. Impressive, but toxic nonetheless. The environment was toxic. And we would talk for hours and hours and hours and hours about breaking things apart, letting him know that, like, although your dreams seem like it's moving in that direction, this is not right. You can't stay here just because you think this is where you're supposed to be, or where society says you're supposed to be, or where your friends say you're supposed to be, or whatever it is. And it's not that he didn't get it, he got it. But it wasn't until we had this conversation so many times, so many times. And finally, when he was face to face with God, had opened a door. It was very uncomfortable the way God did it, because that's usually what happens in order to get you to move. It's done in an uncomfortable way.
Yeah. If you don't move yourself, it's
If
like,
you
oh,
don't,
there you go.
exactly, exactly. But the door, so it was difficult for the person in the moment to see the door was open, if that makes sense, because you're blinded by, all of the other all of what you're going through, the overthinking, the this, you haven't slept in a whatever. But just the outsider, it's like, that's your out. Take it. That's your out. And he took it. He comes back around. We have this conversation again several months later. And he goes, you know what I learned? And it's literally everything that we've been talking about the last 18 months. But it didn't fully click, and almost like align into place, align, until he had the embodiment of what we were talking about. And he was
Yes.
able to execute what we were talking about. Then it clicked. Then it fully clicked for him. So I totally get what you were saying. And I think about that example often, because I notice that in myself too. Sometimes my brain or my soul self is so aware of where I'm supposed to be in life or where I'm going, that if my physical human self is just moving slower in the embodiment of getting there, my brain sometimes goes, well, you're not there yet. Well, you're not doing, you have to move, keep moving, keep moving. I know that's where we're supposed to be. That, and even if that is true, you can't skip or rush the embodiment. It is so stinking important. You can't skip or rush the foundational building of the integration, where your physical self is integrating all of the wisdom in the expansion of your higher self. And once that integration takes place, you've broken through to a new timeline, and you can see things differently. And then what you start to attract higher level experiences, because as within, so without.
Yeah, it's a hermetic principle, right? It's the whole path and progression is all preparation, right? It's all
Yeah.
the personal, because you can tell somebody, I have this conversation I tell many people this when people come to me and say, "Oh, I'm having all these conversations. I'm telling my family and my partners, my this, my that, whatever." They keep having these conversations, just like talking, talking, talking. I'm like,
Mhm.
it's not going to do anything,
Mhm.
right? It might bring some awareness, but the only thing that's actually going to do anything, they have to be prepared to be able to receive that thing. So maybe your brother at the time, maybe 7, 8 months prior, when you first started talking about it, you had all these conversations, right? It's like, if he was ready at that time, then it would just land, boom, it would happen, right? But he
Right.
wasn't ready, so
That.
he had to go through his thing, and there's ways to accelerate this, but we go through these things that prepare us to be able to receive
Mhm.
the next thing, and we go, oh, well, this is uncomfortable. It's not that it's uncomfortable. We sort of determine how comfortable we want it to be by how much we want to hold on to what we think it's right. Right. So it's like
Yeah.
we're in that fire and things are being purified and we're like, oh, the fire hurts. It's like, well, there's ways to make it easier, right?
Mhm.
But that's how, if we truly want to progress, it's like you can break sort of like the faster you can prepare, the faster you can progress because the things land. And once those things land, it activates new energies and there's new circumstances, new realities. I see people get stuck in their mind because I think what you said, I have a lot of people that have corporate jobs, these amazing opportunities, and they're like, oh, but their mind is like, they justify it. They're like, oh, but, they know they should leave that job. They know right from wrong. They know, like, internally, they can feel it that there's something better, whether they know exactly what that better is or they have just an inkling or a sense of like, but there's something else. But then their mind kicks in. They're like, and all the fear and all the boxes keeps clawing them back in. It's like, oh well, you're getting paid this much money. You have this. You have that. You're gonna let go of that, really? You know.
And
And
every single time you make the I'm so sorry to interrupt.
you're good.
It's the embodiment's so minute. Like in all of those little moments, every time you choose to listen to the old pattern, it reinforces the old way of thinking. Every time you make the conscious decision to say, no, 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 wait. Let me at least try and look at it from this perspective. Let me train my brain to look at it from a different perspective. You start to create quite literally a new neural pathway. It's the neuroplasticity of the brain. You literally create almost a highway that is used by more cars than the other highway. So the old highway that used to be that inner, like all the outside noise you were talking about, getting stuck in the mind over and over and over again, it starts to shrivel up until the other one begins to become more and more and more your default. So like the changes I've noticed, at least in my clients and my brother, in myself, taking accountability for, my own healing are all in those little moments. It's not in those massive breakthrough moments you see on TV and in movies all the time. You may have a couple of those, and those are fantastic. But I personally believe like a lot of that power really is in these small choices that you decide to make personally.
Yeah, I mean that's all the big things are built on the details, right? And people want to go right to the big thing and they want to forget about the details and then they
Mm-hmm.
never get the big thing, right? And yeah, there's ways, just to make this stuff more tangible. Everybody's been in a situation where they're stuck, they feel unclear, they feel kind of fear of the unknown, fear of the future. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the energy work comes in because it comes in to raise the energy. It clears the junk, the cloudiness, the fears, the whatever. It's like the non-physical stuff that when we talk about spiritual stuff, some people are like, oh no, that stuff doesn't exist. I'm like, okay, well, when you're sitting and you're worried and scared and you have all these fears and these alternate, like this mucky crap, what is that? Is that physical? They're like, no. I was like, okay, well then you have an understanding of energy, and
I
that's
mean, like a gas.
yeah,
You
and that's
can't
what
get
happens
this. It's
with
still matter.
yeah, and like I was saying, it's like to accelerate. You don't do anything by yourself, but like we can make it harder and go through that process by ourselves and kind of go through the dark night of the soul and that kind of alchemical process, the pain and suffering, or we can partner up with somebody to give us to like a healer and a guide that accelerates that, not in a bad way. It's like the purpose of a healer and guide is to give you a new potential. It's to give you a new energy, a higher energy to work with, to clear up that junk, right? And then once you have that
Mm-hmm.
new feeling, you have your more clarity. You're like, okay, you have everything's flowing better, and you're like, oh, I can do it, or the new opportunity comes, or something you never even imagined comes into your
Mm-hmm.
field, and you're like, oh, okay, that's the next level. That's how I do it, right? And it's just like it makes you energetically stronger, so you're not selling yourself and settling for kind of the mundane, the norm.
Yeah, definitely. Energy healing completely changed my life in every way. So much so that I realized how deeply I can feel energy physically. It actually moves my body sometimes like while I'm healing. And I just decided to get a certification in it because like you said, it just helps so many people. So I knew that it could always help. I could help regulate my own journey, but also the people around me. And that was even before I knew that I was going to create a whole practice with it. But everything happens for a reason. And here we are. And now I use it all the time.
Yeah, it just naturally progresses, right? It's like once that's the same thing with me. It's like once I when somebody first starts like a spiritual path, healings, teachings like that, everybody starts out because of themselves, right? They're like, hey, I just need to like make my life better. And then as your life is progressing, you're like, oh, I have more. I want to share this with people, right? And then that helps people as well. You know, a lot of people a lot of people suffer in silence. I'm like, that's the worst thing to do because there are people that want to help you, but unless you go up and ask for help, it's like I can't go around looking at all the homeless people and be like, oh, well, you must need help. It's like that's not empowering, right? It's like but if
No.
somebody asks me for help, I'm like, yeah, what do you need, right? Uh, I like what you said about sort of what I want to focus on now is the beginning and the reason why people start this stuff. And you said something about your brother, you and your brother maturing early, right? Because a lot of people have, I like to say we're all on the same path, just at different places. It doesn't make either one good or bad, but what happens is when we have pain and suffering and kind of chaos in life, it can go one or two ways. It can either like break us down and make us bitter and dark, or it can open us up and say, hey, there has to be more. It creates that space to say, okay, cool. What worked for me at one point just isn't working anymore. So it pushes you to the next level. It drives your curiosity to step into that unknown and start seeking higher wisdom. Right? So what was sort of the catalyst for you? Sort of the baby steps that got you in
Yeah.
there.
Well, that's there. It's multifaceted.
Yeah.
We went through a lot. And so in my practice, I focus a lot on inner child healing, mainly because I'm so familiar with it. So I had to grow up around the ages of 9, 10-ish. My father is a diagnosed narcissist, very manipulative, abusive, pretty much in every category. And the home was just not a safe place. And my mom got us out of there. But the journey also of having to not just the relationship, the grief of my father, who was my best friend growing up. There was like it's almost like his midlife crisis became our early life crisis. And all of that was projected onto the children. And although right now I have forgiven him, not necessarily invited him back into my life, but have just let it go, he was going through his own stuff. But the fact that he put it all on his children and wife, and then, the whole narcissistic way of, oh, but that's not actually how it happened, and the whole song and dance and, all of that. That is traumatic enough. But the legal process of the separation took 7 years.
That's how mine
And
did
yeah,
with
and
the same family.
the judge would not listen to my mother. He was very biased against what we could tell that it's almost as though we didn't know exactly what happened, but it's almost as though he related to my father in a way, if that makes any sense. It was like he had a soft spot for where my father was coming from when we had all of this evidence, all of this. It was not safe at that time to be with him. And the judge would not listen to us. And I was the oldest. I am the oldest of three. And it was my job to take care of the children take care of the children. I put that on me, even though my mom really helped to take care of us. I also stepped up in a way to try and help protect her. So there was a really rude awakening on how bad people can be or wounded. And at the time, I didn't necessarily see it as wounded. Now I see it as extreme wounding that is projected onto everybody else. But at the time, it's like I didn't realize that people could really be like this. So obviously toxic, so obviously traumatic to your children. I mean, abused in every category. It was more than just mentally, verbally, emotionally. So there was a lot going on at that time. After finally, when I worked for a very long time to get the judge to hear our story, etc., the judge honestly finally closed the case because he was sick of hearing about it after 7 years. That's literally why it closed. So I think it was like a year after that, or 18 months after that, my mom, my brother, and my sister and I, we were all diagnosed with late stage chronic Lyme disease. And we've had the disease for years before we were diagnosed with it. And we were getting gaslit basically by the doctors because it wouldn't come up on the blood tests because it was chronic. Once it's chronic, it's harder to detect on a blood test. The whole thing, the whole medical ordeal of chronic illnesses and there not being a safe space for us. We ended up finding a doctor that doesn't take insurance. It was very stressful financially on the family, but she did end up really bringing us back to full health, but it wasn't without extreme, I guess, intervention in some. We had to go to Germany. We had to go to Germany for FMT transplants because they were not FDA approved in the United States yet. That ended up working because there wasn't really much else they could do for us here. We had a lot of parasites that it was just not good. Our guts were just not in good shape. They're in much better shape now, thank God. So my father planted the seed for the awakening, there being more to life. Like there's more, I have a purpose here to help other people, to help guide other people. And then the whole personal wellness side of what I do was planted by the Lyme disease and that whole journey of being extremely, extremely ill. And then a couple years after that, I met a member of my soul family in 2016, and that really hit the ground running. And here we are. So there was a lot of growing up early, that's for sure, and a lot of realizations and grief early on. But I wouldn't have it any other way at all. Because I am so grateful for exactly where I am right now that I'm actually not happy that it was as dramatic as it was, but thankful it was as dramatic as it was because that made me reach higher. So the higher the challenge, the higher it made me reach. And because of that, I had to reach really high really early. And because of that, people ask, you're so young in your 20s, how are you giving advice to people in their 50s? And that's honestly, I learned things so early. And I also think it's soul wisdom too, things that my soul has taken with her. But yeah, to answer your question. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it brings up a lot of good things because there's a lot of misunderstanding with it's really easy. I mean, there's what are like popular words called? I don't know. There's the word like trauma, narcissist, gaslighting and stuff. That's all. There's like trendy words right now, right?
Yes, for sure.
And what I'm seeing is a lot of people on social media are using that just as another excuse to stay stuck in the trauma. They're saying, "Oh, I'm doing all this healing work and all this whatever to overcome my trauma," but then that becomes like another vice, or it becomes an identifier. It becomes, "Oh, well, this happened to me," right? And I'm like, you didn't say that. Like, what I'm getting at, you're not doing this, but I think a trap for people is to hold on to those things, even though they're healing. They still keep reverting back to that thing, right? And the purpose of healing is to become whole again and progress, right? And like how you said, it's like everybody's going through their own stuff, right? And I think a good way to understand a situation better is that exactly right. It's like nobody, very, 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 very little people in this world are actually trying to do bad, evil things to other people. Everybody thinks, hey, I'm doing the right thing, but for whatever reason, right? If they're, a lot of crime is like, hey, I'm robbing this person because I need things for whatever, right? And it's like the intention's good, the actual fruits of it aren't good. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think it's cool to see women who are saying like, hey, I know this happened to you in the past, but here's a potential. Here is how you can actually grow and empower yourself and actually move past that and create a life of beauty and joy and have all these good things that you didn't, maybe little young us didn't even think that was possible because at that time, it's so chaotic.
The thing that I can honestly say about myself, and it's something that I mean that I'm saying this from the most humble place possible, It's something that I am so insanely grateful for, and I don't even fully understand it to this day. But I always knew that I was going to make some sort of impact. So when this was happening, there were a lot of voices telling me, like, no, this is not going to happen because of XYZ. But there was something, it never died. That light never went out. I always reverted back to hell no. Like I'm not, no. No, I'm not, we're not there yet. We're going to keep going. There's something where, I mean, there are those moments of doubt, but the seed was so strong. And you know what it is? It's more than a gift. It's honestly, my relationship with the divine is so, it's a daily part of my life. It is something where I talk to my spirit team every day, like they're my friends, and I hear them respond to me. We go back and forth all the time. That there's no way I would be left there. Of course, I'm going to come out of this. Of course, I'm going to use this to help other people. And although there were the moments of that doubt, there is something that I never let go of that light, and that's something that little Alessandra went through the frickin' ringer. But that is something that she never let go of, and I can say I'm very proud of her and proud of me for still holding on to that, even when I'm, still striving to embody and achieve what it is that I'm going for to this day.
Yeah, it's always there. I think, I could relate to that, and I think a lot of people can as well too. It's like when we come into the world, we have it's just like pure innocent us,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have kind of the junk of the world just kind of like tries to close in on us, right? And it can get very dark. And I think that's why a lot of people turn away from the divine, is because they're like, oh, the world sucks, and like, why is this happening to me, right? But the connection is always there. The only issue is we choose to block it, and that's the thing when I do the first parts of healing session is to reactivate that within us and then reconnect it through initiation and a spiritual path. And yeah, like what you said, because it's like it goes beyond just physicality. It's like a spiritual resilience that say, hey, I know this is going to be extremely tough, but I can still feel something. There's still something driving me forward. This seems impossible right now, but it's like it's a feeling. Going back to like even relating to your brother and all these other stories, it's like there's a feeling. That feeling is driving us forward. It's the more we cultivate that feeling and more we cultivate that connection to the divine, because I always say it all the time. It's like divine. It doesn't matter what religion or belief you have, right? And however you want to identify the divine, it's like, but what it is, it's like our power source, right? It's a team. It's a team. It's a hierarchy. It's a structure. It's all these angelic beings and so forth that are much, much, much greater and stronger than our crap and physicality and the limitations and all the things, all the trauma and darkness that we think is that we're stuck in, right? So I think this is a really good way to get people to understand, spiritual teachings and stuff. It's like it reconnects you back to that. So now you have a whole army on your side. Now you can say like, hey, I need help with this. You can call in this energy, that. And it's all the rituals and the exercises and modalities we have is to connect to those higher energies to lift us up, to lift us up out of our shit, out of the trauma and crap. And it's like, I think this goes back to your story. It's like when we're in the shit, when we're on like level one and chaotic and cloudy and stressed, we don't understand what's going on because we can't see it. And it's like as we ascend and elevate and refine our energy, we go up, 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 and then we look down and you're like, oh, now I have understanding of that. Sort of like what you're saying. It's like as above, so below, as within, so without. So we have to, where I see people get stuck is they're trying to find answers and things that justify, that make sense to them at the level they're at, because you know they don't understand the next level. And that makes sense, because if they understood the next level, they would be at the next level, right? So there is a sacrifice of what we think is to ascend to that next level and refine ourselves, and then we have the understanding. We go, oh, okay, cool. And that's how we move past those chains of trauma and opinion and
Mm-hmm.
fears and all that stuff. Is like, you don't, traditional therapy is like, oh, just talk about it, keep talking about it, keep talking about it. With a spiritual path, it's like, no, just let go of it, ascend, refine yourself, and we just, elevate. It's like
Dare I say use it?
what's that?
Dare I say use it?
Well, that's another good thing. You have to use it because if you don't
You
use
have
it,
to use it. It becomes your
yeah,
engine.
yeah. So you can give somebody all the tools in the world. You can give them the only thing a healer and a guide do is they give as much potential as they possibly can to that person. But just like anything else, it's a choice. It really comes down to a choice of like, okay, do I want to stay in this trauma and story and limitation, or do I want to use the tools to empower myself to move forward? It's not until the person actually does it. A lot of people are just kind of waiting around. They're like, oh, well, maybe my boyfriend or husband, maybe they'll change. I don't have to change. Maybe they'll change. Maybe this person will stop hurting me. Maybe I'll get this job. Maybe whatever will happen. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. It would be nice, make life easy, but they don't, you don't earn anything like that. And then you just don't become that thing, you know?
Totally. If you don't do your end of it, it's never going to materialize ever. If you haven't embodied enough to make the decision, you're not ready. What I think is, for me, I consider myself the telephone cord. I'm literally just the telephone cord. So when people come to me, clients come to me, I'm talking to their guides, I'm talking to my guides, I'm just the telephone cord. So it's them talking to spirit, basically. And so spirit is giving them the advice, so to speak, not Alessandra. That doesn't mean that they show me personal examples of mine all the time, but it's also because I'm evolved enough to know when to allow them to speak through me, if that makes sense. Evolved enough to know when to step back and allow the divine to work, to use me as a vessel to continue to help ignite more light in other people. The more people that turn on their light, the higher the vibration of the planet. So imagine one person versus a million people with their light turned on. It's
So you have like
completely
a
different. It's a completely different environment. It's a completely different reality. And I think that as you grow, everybody in their own way, so long as you put your ego aside, everyone becomes a telephone cord. Everyone slowly becomes a medium, so to speak, for the divine to use to mobilize, to help people evolve. However, you have to answer that calling. You have to choose to answer that calling. It's all a choice.
well,
And
it's
if
sort of like what you said about the link in the chain, right? Everybody that starts that, they all eventually commune together and they become stronger and it becomes a
Mhm.
tighter bond, right? And then
Yes.
energy, the more other people are taking up the responsibility and doing the work, the tighter that connection is and the more impactful it is. Like you were saying, it's like one light compared to like a big fire. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? It's like that is so much stronger. And that's, yeah, there's a responsibility not only for yourself, but other people. Right. And there's a lot of people, social media and news and all that stuff. We have a lot of opinions about, oh, well, the world should be like that. But it's like, okay, well, what are you doing about it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I personally, I tell my people, and this is how I live, but if I can't personally affect change on it, I just stay out of it.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And some of it is resistance, or a lot of it is resistance. We are where we are for a reason, and we're not going to move forward until the collective lesson is learned. So stop resisting and trying to force a different outcome instead of just realizing, wait a minute, maybe we're meant to be here collectively so we can learn this lesson and move forward. Look at society thousands of years ago versus now. They were barbaric in comparison. And although we still have ways to go, let's compare it to even just the way people spoke to each other, the hierarchies. It was everywhere. Like that was the way of life. The barbaric nature, the land, the territory, the way people would go about. If you look at ancient civilizations, they were brutal. Now, again, we still have room to grow, but dare I say we are significantly more awakened now than we were then. And that
I
is
think,
because that does not mean though, like there were some beautiful beautiful souls around at that time, like Socrates, like all. But now there's more people that are just thinking like that. And there are people that are less helpless. And it's because less people are in survival mode as well. People are now learning. We're at a place in society where we can actually, or more people have space to thrive versus just survive. For so long, it has been money, food, what war is going on, what depression is going on, whatever it may be. Now, for us more than ever, we are given space to thrive. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not talking politically, I'm talking generally, in the general space of the collective energy.
I think
Does that
people are
make
free. Yeah, a lot of people, I get both sides. A lot of people are like, whoa, the world's going to shit. They think it's just going to be this, the world's just going to fall apart. And I was like, the reason you actually, this is, sort of the microcosm and macrocosm of it. The reason people think the world's falling apart is because we can see more of what needs cleaned up now because there's more light.
Mm-hmm.
It's like going into a
Yeah,
messy, dark room and turning a light or having a flashlight to start out, or turning the lights on
right.
and be like, oh, this thing's all messy. This is all the stuff I've been bumping into and hurting myself. But now I can
Right.
see it, and because when you can see it, then you can actually clean it up. But if you stay in the dark and the chaos and the illusion, then you can never see your stuff. You can never clean it up. And that's the same thing with, this is why people get a little worried when they're like start working on themselves, is because when you bring in more light, then they can see their stuff. They go, oh, I gotta clean that stuff up now, right?
And
But
you
it's like
mentioned that,
that's an
like if
what's
you've
up?
been in the dark, like if you've been in the dark for so long and all of a sudden light shines in your eyes, that shit hurts.
Yeah.
Like it really does hurt. I love the metaphor you're using, the darkness and the all of that. That's because I really definitely think that's where society is, or a lot of people are nowadays.
And they're not seeing the light parts of that. They're like, because there's more light, so there's more good things happening, but there's also
Mm-hmm.
more craziness. People are kind of losing their minds because of like, oh shit, what do I do? Right?
But like also let's just compare it to like World War II, okay? Like the world's been going to shit, if that makes any sense. There are, within every century, there's been things that might as well seem like the world is going to shit or make you believe, like the assassination of Lincoln, the Civil War, right? Like the world is going to shit. Like if you're going to think that the world is going to shit, you would be in the middle of a civil war of a country that was just founded like 50 years ago, 50, 60, 70 years ago. So there are constantly these, I read tarot and I call them tower moments because the tower card represents the collapse of what needs to be cleaned up before it gets rebuilt. You cannot rebuild a solid structure on wobbly land. The old structure has to come down. So as we evolve, there's going to be these constant collective moments of fear, worry, it looking or seeming like the world is going to shit. And I guess in the momentarily, people aren't wrong. I guess it is, but it's not going to shit, period. It's not going to shit just to stay like that. Things are getting worked up for a reason.
Well, it
Things are being
could.
brought up for a reason.
I mean, it still has the potential to go to shit if people don't improve it. I think that's another thing. It's like if we just are passive, we don't take responsibility. If we just stay in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
then if we're just standing around, what's going to happen is we're going to start slowly regressing or quickly regressing. And that's the thing. It's a choice. It's either you can take responsibility and take care of your own stuff, so you can then take care of other people. All these big worldly problems that we don't personally have the power for, as we take care of more of ourselves, then we can take care of our community, take care of our country, whatever it is. And I think that's another good thing to say. It's like, well, if you want the world to be better, it has to start with you. It has to, like, going back to the
100%.
link in the chain. If you're like, hey, why is because it's easy to point fingers at the government and the this or that, whatever. Right? But it's like, yeah, it's sort of like they have the power to do that because they're in that position. Whether it's good or bad or whatever people's belief is, they still got there. So it's like you can affect if you're just only worried about yourself, you have little power right here. You can only affect so much change. Once you actually progress and go up, then you have more power to have more impact in the world and do all those things. But it's like it's all responsibility, right?
Yeah, definitely. I'm seeing a refreshing, even if I don't necessarily agree politically, I'm seeing a refreshing amount of people wanting to shake things up because of the way the blinders are coming off, even if it's not exactly the same. And perception is everything. So when it comes to spirituality, you can tell when people are fed up. And fed up is usually, it's honestly, it's the microcosm of your own spiritual journey. You become fed up with the old life you're living. Like, you know that you're worth so much more than that. And you stand up to fight for yourself. So you stand up to fight for your reality. You stand up to fight, it's both things are happening at the same time. So even if where people are or like how people want to specifically solve the problem, maybe we may not agree on that. But I'm seeing more than ever cases or scenarios, I should say, where people on both sides of the aisle are starting to actually agree on certain things. And to me, that is showing, and the media loves to portray us as like this all the time, when I think we're actually so much more alike than we are different. And if we're able to embrace that, that's not to say about the outliers. The loudest people on both sides are the outliers. So the vast majority of us are people just trying to find our way. And we realize that we really are just so much more alike than we are different when society begins to crumble itself, because the foundation it's built upon is based on fear and materialism, things that are bound to break and crack at some point. What is that? And the energy of fear and that materialism and all of that has never sustained itself. It's always crashed and burned at some point. Every empire has fallen. The only thing that has stayed consistent is love.
Yeah,
If
so
you think about
anything built on illusion eventually goes away. I mean,
it,
to
right?
the original conversation, marriage, relationships. If your marriage and relationship is built off anything else than truth, then
Mm-hmm.
it's going to eventually fall apart, right? Because a lot of people justify it. They say, oh, well, I like this guy because, this girl because, whatever. And it's all these mental justifications, right? I think I should be married. I think, your mind, I would say your mind's a shitbox. Just get out of your mind. But because they think it's the right thing, they build this illusion and they try to justify and say, okay, well, it's that, whatever. But the truth is, truth is knowing. It's a feeling that goes beyond your mind. And yeah, if those things, as things progress, and whether you're on a spiritual path or not, it's going to happen regardless, because energy is always coming in to build us and drive us forward, and we can either resist it or go with it. And the more we resist it, the more it just builds up. And that's why we have all this, people talk about anxiety and fear and depression, all this stuff. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, is it actually something negative, or is it something just driving you to go forward and go with the flow and go to a higher flow, not stay stuck and stay small? Because, that's why it comes down to people, most people see physical things and they say, okay, well, this is all there is. It's like, but beyond that, what creates all these things? It's like the energy. What does energy
Right.
want to do? Energy
Yeah.
always wants to expand. So if you're not expanding with that, you're going to feel these growing pains. You're going to make it way harder than it needs to be.
Yep.
I think
Yep.
that's good for, I think that's really a good point for relationships or anything we're doing, or society or government, all that stuff. Does it serve people's progression and people's growth to become better? And if it doesn't, if it's something that is against person's progression or against their growth, against coming together to become stronger, then it needs to be looked at and should probably go away, or it will eventually, like you said, it eventually will crumble. Because the only thing that's going to be, the illusion will eventually crumble. Then there will be actual reality, right? So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
it's sort of this thing. That's why I don't like to be, um, go too overboard with the spiritual stuff. But the spiritual stuff does give you context to actually understand what's going on and get you out of the chaos, because then you can kind of see things for actually what they are, and you're like, oh, okay.
I mean, we're spiritual beings. We're humans living a spiritual experience. We're humans having a spiritual experience. Like, we don't say, I am a body. We say, I have a body. So who is I? Is it the human self? Is it the soul? Who is I? And I believe it's really important that people remember who they are and realize how much of a spiritual experience you're actually living. So even if you don't necessarily think you're on the quote unquote awakening journey or on a spiritual journey, by you just being down here on planet Earth, you are living a spiritual experience, because you are inherently an energetic body inside a physical body. And as people begin to awaken to that fact, life becomes so much less finite. Life becomes so much more possible. Life becomes so much less structured. And I personally think the remembrance of who you are can tap into your soul's purpose, can tap into soul relationships that you're meant to be with, soul partnerships, work partnerships that are on a soul purpose level, tapping into who you are. It
We're saying like
starts to,
authenticity becomes more
yeah,
authentic because yeah, you shed the illusion and you have the reality, authentic
yes.
version.
And realizing that you are like, you're not just someone stuck in this scenario. You are a soul living a human experience meant to come out of this, meant to transcend it. You're meant to transcend it back to light. It's supposed to be done that way. You were given every single tool you would need in order to do that. You have every single tool inside of you. That also includes the willingness to reach out for help if needed. Like, I know for me, my spiritual teacher, shout out to Sarah, was instrumental to me. And as a practitioner, I strive to be the resource that I didn't have. So if there was any, using what she provided and even more. And I hope that as people go through their spiritual journeys, they realize that life is so much more than just your own personal journey. It's the effect you have on other people, like you were saying before.
Yeah, people are way too worried about themselves. As soon as you start like, somebody's sitting there depressed or anxious, stop worrying about yourself. Go move. Like one, go move your body or do anything. Reach out to
Body.
somebody, read a book, do something. Your
Yep.
energy needs to move.
Do something.
And
Yep.
then that will lead you closer to the potential of just sitting there wallowing in your crap and just, being negative. So yeah, there's a guy who was doing a podcast 4 days ago and he was like, I had no idea what to do. So I went to the gym. I just moved my body and that led to the next thing.
Yeah.
God, you said something that was really good. Oh, I know. One of my, because people are very stuck in the physical world and they think that's all that there is, right? They have most 99% of our problems are spiritual problems. They're not physical problems. And as one of my teachers says, we're trying to solve spiritual problems with physical tools. And it just doesn't work that way, right?
Right.
And then the spiritual tools reach far, far, far beyond physicality, right? And
Yeah.
that's gonna accelerate things. That's actually gonna solve the issue, right? Like I said earlier in this podcast, is like people have all these internal thoughts and feelings. So I'm like, okay, can you hold that in your hand? They're like, no. So I'm like, well, how are you trying to combat that with something physical? Maybe it's a vice, maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's drugs, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. Like you're trying to, or all these like pills for mental health and all this stuff. It's like it's just going to sedate and just keep the issue kind of stuck there and trapped and get even worse, right? You need to solve these things that appear to be invisible. You need these, I mean, they're not invisible, that you need these like invisible tools, these higher tools beyond they reach beyond your current state and your chaos and stress and all this stuff. You need to bring those in to be able to cut away, you know, your spiritual issues.
Yeah. The activation of, you have a sixth sense. That's not just a horror movie. And I don't like that they used that. It gives it a bad rep. But so what are senses? It's how we perceive information. So when we touch something, noted, it's hot, got it. Or when we smell something, can't wait to eat, I'm getting hungry. Like, that's how we start to perceive information, gather information in our brains. And our sixth sense are all of the clair senses. So clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, the feeling, claircognizance, that download, that just knowing. There's so many different clair senses, and we technically all have most of them.
Well,
But
to clarify, a lot of people won't understand what senses are. So senses are basically, we have our five senses, and I like to say clairsentience are kind of our superpowers, our spiritual extension of our five physical senses. So you're tapping in more to the subtlety of each one, more of the refined version of each one. So if it's like eyesight, right? It's like that more subtle, refined like version of that. Or maybe another way to look at it too, it's like your sight goes beyond just what you can see. It can go and you can do meditations and see stuff in there, or
right,
you can, as we ascend beyond just physicality, things become more subtle and
right,
less
it's energetic.
physical. Yeah, and I see a lot of people, they try to take these spiritual things and put them down in this physical box, right? So there's ways to like bridge that gap and make it sensible, but it's not, if you're telling somebody about, clairsentience, right? It's not like you're gonna, people feel energy, they feel warmth, they feel tingling, they feel things moving, they feel emotions and stuff, and they're connecting with people. But as we're getting more of that, it's the subtle world, the less it becomes less and less physical. It takes more clarity, and meditation is a good way to help develop those senses, and you really tap into those. How do I say it? It's subtlety, but it comes with a higher wisdom that's going to go beyond. It's not going to say like, hey, you know how do I solve this money problem, or how do I solve a relationship problem? It's like, is it arguing, is it making more money? It's like, no, there's something beyond that that's creating that you can go directly to that source of that, right? And make that shift, and then that becomes, shifts away faster than trying to force it.
Yeah. Um, I part of what I offer a spiritual development beginners class is actually like how to use them, what to specifically do practically, how to develop each one. People don't even realize what they have. I have people that have joined the class that have never in a million years thought that they were psychic, quote unquote, and they are. We all are. And by the end of it, I'm showing them a picture, telling them absolutely nothing, and they're able to basically give me the whole backstory on this person, and they're accurate. It's amazing. Like they're like, how the heck do I know that?
It's
It's
cool once you
because
have people in that container
cool.
too. The container in the space makes a big difference in having people together doing that. Because yeah,
Yeah.
like you just said, people are like, wait, I had that. I try to first relate to a common experience that we all have. Then like they're like, oh, I don't have those. I can't feel energy. I can't do this. I can't do that. It's like, what about that one time in your life that like, okay, yeah, I guess you're right. And then they practice it. The only difference is like everybody has it. You need to develop it, and that's where.
The muscle.
Yeah, it's a muscle. It's the same thing. It's like if you go to the gym, if you go to the gym once, okay, you get results for that day and then it goes away. You have to continue. That's why we have rituals and practices.
Yes.
To Rituals are like going to the gym to build the spiritual muscles.
Mm-hmm.
It's the
Yep.
rituals are the consistent day-to-day actions that we take to become stronger so we can, it comes down to becoming stronger so we can take care of what we need to take care of.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
I
think,
use that exact metaphor in my what are you, psychic or something? I use that
yeah,
exact metaphor in my class. So it's because it's so normal, and I was this way too when I was studying. It's so normal to be in your head and be like, no, I'm overthinking it. Oh no, I don't know this person. Who are you showing me? Who is this? You're telling me nothing, and I have to like tell you about. They overthink it, and then usually when we're at the point of just discussing, I tell them, stop the brain and just do it. What do you feel? And they go for it and they shock themselves. And it's important to realize that it is a muscle and you're not going to get it like this every single time, especially if you're just getting started. You are able to pick up on so much more than you think in your daily life. You use your intuition so much more than you think in your daily life. It's actually a daily tool people use and they don't even know that they're using
well,
it.
it's just automatic. It can be most people they're using it, but it's automatic to their crap. It's automatic. They're not
Exactly.
consciously using it. So it's I think there's a thing saying like most people are 10% conscious, 90% subconscious. So when
Mm-hmm.
most people are using that, that's something you've probably heard Kabbalah, right? Kabbalah is a way to structure the mind so we can actually process all that stuff, right? And clear the
Yeah.
subconscious. The issue is most people they resort straight to the subconscious and they're like, oh, it's not working, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to train the other side. Um, One of the biggest things with that as we're developing our senses is to be able to receive things, we have to be able to trust, right? And that goes beyond the mind. The mind's going to tell us, oh no, we failed this a million times, we suck, we this, we that, right? Then knowing this, that's what a good thing to, if you want somebody to have a direct experience, it's like, what's the first thing that just came in before you thought about it, before you put it in your subconscious, and your subconscious, oh well,
Mm-hmm.
it's wrong, it's whatever. It's like the very first thing that comes in is probably the right thing. So it's building the trust, and without trust, this is a more feminine aspect. But without trust, you're not able to receive, right? So we don't trust ourselves, we don't trust other people, whatever reason. We cut ourselves off, and we don't trust God, right? If we don't trust God, then we can't receive from God, and we
Right.
can't we can't utilize that thing. We can't have that experience, whatever it is.
Yeah, totally. Totally. My pre advanced class just this week We've been doing a lot of manifestation stuff and things like that. And we wrapped back around 2 readings again this past week. And they were in their heads a lot about how, they just kind of felt off. It wasn't right. And by the time they were done, they did great. They did a great job. But the problem was that while they were receiving the information, they were almost judging the information they were receiving, questioning whether or not it was their voice, somebody else's voice. So there was a judgment as it was received, or before. It was almost like a wall was up. The muscle is that trust too. It's trusting the link, strengthening the link you have to spirit. There's always that tight, tight, tight rope that attaches you to the divine. That's where you come from. And the more you trust it, the thicker it gets and the stronger it gets. And the more you know that you'll never fall. Spirit always shows up. So even if there's a day where I'm really off or I'm dealing with my own crap and I have very little space to give to whomever needs my help, I still have to show up. That is part of my job. And the way I do that is in those moments, on those days, how I'm able to give those people the same type of guidance I would on a day where I have naturally a lot of space to give, is that trust in the divine, is the link that I have built over the years, is knowing that they always show up. And I ask, I'm feeling off today. Can you please speak a little louder? You're allowed to ask for things like that. If you're going into a circumstance in your life that you know is going to be tough, you're allowed to say, please allow this to be done in the most peaceful way possible. That doesn't mean it's going to be a walk in the park, but you've at least executed your free will and asked for it to be done in that way. And whether it's done in that way or not, that's really up to the universe, but you are allowed to ask, please allow this to be done in such and such a way. And that all has to do with trust.
Yeah, it's one of my Power Self class I teach. Calling upons. It's calling upons are calling upon cosmic energy to come in to support you with whatever you're doing, right? So it's sort of meeting you halfway. It says, hey, well, you can call in the energy, but you have to take the action and work with that energy. Another thing, I think it goes back to the trusting yourself in the subconscious and conscious mind. This is day 2 of my class. I think in the morning. It's my absolute favorite part in the Empower Thyself class I teach. It's called Cycle of Human Processes. And it's a very logical, visual kind of map of how stimulus comes in, and we sort stimulus between like positive and negative, right? And, because what happens is energy comes in, it creates a stimulus, and then it creates a thought, which creates a feeling, or it creates a feeling, which creates a thought, in which we, all thoughts are acted upon, right? So if we take that, if the negativity comes in and we don't shift it, then we take a negative action, right? So it's kind of like, feeling, thought, action. And a really good way to, when we're doing healing work, another thing it works on is our programming, our kind of blueprint, right? Because energy is, like I said, energy is always coming in. But if it's coming in this like crappy filter, what comes out is also crap. So the energetic work is working on that higher realm and clearing that filter. So the filter is clear. So when energy comes in, you have the positive thoughts, actions. And then all of a sudden, manifestation, like, oh, wow, manifesting such an amazing life. It's because it's your channel is clear. So what you're observing, what you're experiencing is clear as well.
Yeah, that ties into the chakra system and everything else, and holding space and containers and all. It unlocks a whole other world.
Fry people's minds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you think, like I said, I work with mostly guys. Where do you think a lot of people get stuck with understanding or integrating somebody says spiritual, like where do you think people really get stuck at from their own personal experience? Not saying like, hey, they need to know themselves or disconnected. Those are the big thing. That's what we're working on. But personally, where do you think people have a hard time either understanding the spiritual stuff or utilizing it for themselves?
I personally think it's the lack of exposure that society gives us from a young age to this type of spirituality, to the way energy works, etc. a lot of us are put into boxes of religion and limits and confinements and things like that. So spirituality has become such a broad term that I think when you say it, people aren't exactly sure. Do you mean religion? Do you mean like they don't really know what you mean? Are you new age? Honestly, I'm none of that. I'm me. I'm an energetic being. And I think people get stuck on categorizing and then there's a lack of exposure as well, meaning like they don't have
You're like off to the side right now. The camera. There you go. That's better.
there's a lack of exposure. So because of the lack of exposure, we don't have the tools that we normally would have to draw upon knowing with someone that is more advanced spiritually what they're talking about. So they don't have necessarily the vocabulary or the understanding because we're taught about how separate God is from us and that there's a heaven, a hell, a punishment, and all of these other things that I don't think we're given the tools. I don't think we're set up to win from when we're really little, unless you're specifically taught that from when you're little to be able to understand it better. So from what I've seen is the understanding of what spirituality means to you, what spirituality means in general. Basically, I would say detangling what spirituality is because it's a little different to everybody you talk about. Or talk to, I should say.
Yeah, well, yeah, people definitely get stuck in the mind of trying to kind of categorize everything and understand all this stuff that I think it's like the mind number one. It's like the teacher comes when the student's ready because this stuff's been around for thousands and thousands of years. It's what we're really tapping into is true reality. It's a flow of energy that we just don't have an awareness of yet.
Mm-hmm.
And similar to both of our stories, it's like we didn't tap into it until there was a desire to. We had to go through enough stuff to create the space to be able to receive for the teacher to come. We had to go through this stuff, become curious, and open ourselves up to have a desire to say, hey, what else is there? And as soon as we did that, the teacher came, right? That's when we started our path. I see, like, my answer to that question myself would be people get stuck in they get stuck in their mind, and the spiritual stuff is not going to, it's so much more powerful than our mind and our opinions and our crap and what we can see. And what it truly is, like, manifestation, there's new age manifestation, basically just like think this and it will happen and whatever. But I see, especially for guys, is just to make spirituality at the core of what it is. It's like we're talking about energy and how to cultivate that energy.
Mm-hmm.
There's the teachings create the container in the system, whether it's Kabbalah or whatever it is, to have a structure and flow for the energy, how to purify things of us in our psyche and our being to be able to receive more energy. And again, energy is not, I had somebody that wanted to work with me, I think last week, and they said, I'm very quantitative with my decisions. Basically, they want to, I pay this, I get that. And I'm like, but what if it's like it kind of one to one? It's like, okay, I put in this, I get this out. I'm like, but you're holding yourself back. What if you can put in this and get that back? So much
Right.
more. But you just want to see this because that's all, you're expecting this. And it's like, it's just going to keep you stuck at where you're at.
Right.
And I see there's what's lacking in sort of spiritual social media is it's all about creating the essence, the feeling, the energy behind what you want to experience. It's taking the action to, it's not saying just like sit there and meditate and the things will happen because that's not true either. That's a very new age, irresponsible thing. But it's taking the action, doing the internal work, doing the physical work to build to that energy so you have that inside you. It's a knowing and then you experience it. So when people, expect this is mostly guys I'm saying, but they say, well, how do I, it's, they want the spiritual experience to be physical. I'm like, that's just never going to happen. It's literally building. It's all about the energy behind it. Right. And it's like,
Yes.
that is the sort of flip in psyche I understand because we're so used to physical world. Like, well, what do you mean? And it's like I said before, it's like it's not until you have that direct experience with it, then then you've done the work to be able to receive that essence, that energy of the thing, and then you get to experience it. I think that my experience with my clients and just men overall, it's because women get this. They're like, okay, I feel everything, and maybe I feel too much. Like they get it. They're masters of the stuff. The guys are like, well, if I can't hold it or touch it or see it, it
Right.
doesn't exist. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
going back to marriage and union, you have to, we have physical relationships, but we have the internal relationship with ourselves, right? And that's why we have both masculine and feminine inside ourselves. Hermetically, men are the ideal balance is 70% masculine, 30% feminine, and vice versa for women. They should be 70% feminine, 30% masculine, because it's not that a guy has to be more like a woman, but there's aspects, like I was saying, like the trust and being open to receive, that create that put you more in alignment, so you can actually utilize that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the energetic work is the feminine. That's the shadow work. That is the looking at yourself in the mirror. It's the energy, like you were saying, the feeling. It's the trust. It's the intuition. And you can't do that alone. But then the masculine, you've got the drive, you've got the protection, you've got so many other honorable aspects of making what you're feeling into a reality. But if you only do action, 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 action with no intuition,
Just break
you're
yourself.
not right. Exactly. You need to be able to incorporate both and balance both out, because they're equally as important. And even if one is dominant, the other, you can't become whole without incorporating the other into that. And also just by being able to understand where your partner is coming from too. Because if you think of yourself as so incredibly separate from that person, that's going to create just a difference in thinking, etc., when you're actually a lot more alike than you are different. And if you can get into each other's worlds a little bit, that will actually solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of hyper masculine guys on social media,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, well, think of a guy. There's a guy that's just like, think of I like to use an example. Like, think of a guy that's just super masculine, working out really hard all the time, and he's not able to receive anything. He's gonna limit himself because he's only gonna be as good as what he can only do, and he's also not gonna be able to receive healing energy. So if you're pushing yourself hard, 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 and running yourself into the wall all day, and you can't heal and receive, you're eventually just gonna hurt yourself, right? That's kind of interplay of the masculine and feminine. Is the feminine brings in that like soft healing energy, so you can become even, the guy that's more balanced is going to far exceed the guy that's distorted, that's hyper masculine, because the guy that can receive is going to be able to build, receive, heal, build, receive, heal, and keep
Mm-hmm.
progressing continuously. Or even
Yeah.
like, another thing I see is new age spiritual. There's a lot of passiveness in it, right? And I guess to explain a masculine aspect of the feminine, if the feminine is just kind of like damsel in distress and like, oh, I can't do anything for myself, I need to receive everything, and just kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, whatever, she'll never get anything done either, right? So it's not
Mm-hmm.
about like, people are confused when you talk about masculine and feminine. It's not women need to be like guys, but
No.
there's an energy or there's an aspect that can help raise, to
Mm-hmm.
become more, balanced and feminine. So yeah, that's where a lot of people definitely get caught up. But what I was saying, in the spiritual world, there's this new age belief of like, oh, spiritual is this nice, soft, loving thing. It's very passive. I'm just gonna go live in the woods. I don't have to do anything. And that's I would say, the very distorted feminine version of that, because you get these guys that are kind of these like, ooh, like whatever, but then it's like, what are you getting? Like, what's actually being done? That's
Right.
not moving. That's not helping yourself. That's not helping anybody else. It's very irresponsible.
Totally. I completely agree. No way is your dream life just going to knock on your door because you did a meditation about it. Like that doesn't even make sense. Um, but then you see the guys who have been working so hard. Like, yes, you've been on a grind for years. I got
Yeah.
it. I get it. I see it. And it's that matters. But you haven't been listening to this. You've been on the wrong path. You're going after the wrong thing. That's at that point, it's still not going to arrive at your door. So just at your door while you are maybe eating dinner, even though you've been on the grind all day long. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's not going to happen.
That brings up
And
a good point. I've said before, I think this was like during COVID, it was a Kabbalah study group call with one of my teachers here. And one of the points, I said this from my experience, I said, before I started my spiritual path, it felt like my life was progressing, but it was like it was going up, up, up in the wrong way. It was like
Mhm.
kind of building success with the illusion. And then when I started the spiritual path, it was like, oh no, we got to shift that. And we like recorrected. Now it feels like it's going up in the actual way, right? It's like true reality. And it's like then you feel it's sustainable success. It's not just fleeting success. It's not something you're always chasing. It's like,
Right.
I think that goes into your point of like guys, yeah, like guys can work very, very hard and feel, sort of matrix success and have the money, the cars, whatever, but they're missing the true success, which is, opposite of that.
I mean, there's a reason why the distorted feminine is looking for the man with money and not wanting to do anything herself. There's a reason why the distorted feminine is putting the wrong things on display. Like her body is everything versus the mind or anything else. I'm having so little self worth. Like you see a lot of that on social media as well. Even when it comes to like this freedom, so freedom, it's like masked as freedom, but it's
Yeah.
really just it's just a distraction from actually taking responsibility and accountability for your own healing, stepping up to the plate and doing it. There's all of these other movements and loudness, and that the new age is. I don't blame people that are turned off by the category new. I understand so clearly, see what they're talking about, but it personally, I think it's hard because there is no category. It's hard for people to understand what someone like you or I do, until you would have to have a conversation with them, because it's not conventional right now. And maybe one day, hopefully one day, it will be more conventional and built into society more. I don't know how or when that would happen, but
I
I
mean, it's
think.
already there. The thing with the new age, that's kind of like a question of good and bad, because the temptation's always there to like do these, make the quick, easy money. And I like to tell people, it's like, well, somebody was like, how do I tell from right or wrong? I'm like, well, does it give you, is there responsibility attached to it? And does it build you long term? If it's only building you short term, it's probably a trick. It's probably an illusion, because what happens is these people they want freedom because a lot of people don't want responsibility, but responsibility comes with power, and there's a structure to that, right? You're not just going to guess your way to success. And that's why there's, I guess, on the opposite side of New Age, there's lineage, right? Like lineage has been around. Lineage is schools, mystery schools have been around for thousands and
Mhm,
thousands of years. This was traditionally where people like, Nikola Tesla, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci,
mhm,
Winston Churchill, all these great leaders, it's like, how do they reach a high level of success? They had a plan and a process, and they had to take higher and higher levels of responsibility, and that's how they became.
mhm,
That's how they ascended into who they were. Right? They're
mhm,
masters of lights. Everybody, every very good person throughout history has most likely been a part of some type of school or training or structure to get them to that level. That's not, that can be off-putting for people, because a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want structure. And it's like, but that creates the container to create all of the good. So it's not like, it doesn't have to be rigid structure, like maybe, you can look at religion or very dogmatic paths, but it has to be enough structure to still propel you forward. It has to be like a channel, right? It's like a
mhm,
body of water without any channel is it just sits there stagnant. Once it's channeled, it can be productive. And that's what I would say. Anybody who's looking for a true spiritual path, look at how long it's been around. I don't know, you said you're trained with your teacher, but has it been around? I mean, my lineage personally has been around for over 3,500 years. So it's like, when somebody asks you, like, oh, how are you so wise at a young age? It's like, we're not doing it based off, 20, 30, 40 years of being here. We're doing it based off of what we tapped into a flow of wisdom that's been around way longer than us. And that's what we're sharing. We're the conduit to share that with people. Sort of like that, a lineage is a unbroken chain. It's that you become a piece of that chain and becomes more powerful, right? So a lot of people on social media, these coaches, they have, oh, I read this book last week, I did this, I did that, and they don't know, there's no energy or lineage or like wisdom behind it. So they share based off its limitation. It doesn't really move anybody forward, you know?
mhm.
That's sort of what we were
Yeah.
talking about before. If you're working with somebody, you should understand. There's two questions if you're working with somebody. Ask them who their teachers are, sort of get a feel of how long this stuff has been around, and what is the ultimate result that they're trying to get for those people, right? Are they trained? Are they certified? As we were saying before, there's a lot of these new age kind of woo spiritual healers and teachers that completely pulled this out of their ass last weekend, and they think, well, they can make no sense of it. And then you see, if you ask them, well, who are your teachers? I don't have any. What the results are you trying to get for your people? Oh, they can just play with this. Like, okay, well, what does that do? They can just play with it.
Mhm.
I've had somebody tell me that, unfortunately. I'm like, what's, you know, it's dangerous, and that's why the spiritual stuff gets a bad name, is because there's a lot of phonies out there, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of them for
Yeah.
sure.
Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant.
No, that's okay. That's no, I followed.
Yeah, but I think that's a, you know, it's be discerning of, you know, if you're reaching out to one of us or another teacher. I mean, obviously we would like to, you know, serve who we're supposed to be connected to, right? But just I guess in general, if somebody's looking to begin their spiritual path, those are really good questions to ask. Like, hey, where do these teachings come from, and how long have they been around, and what result am I ultimately trying to get here?
Mhm.
And if they can give you good
Yeah.
answers, that's a good sign. If they can't, then run.
Right,
You know,
totally. And trust your own inner compass and your own guidance, your own inner what feels right. So take what
yeah.
resonates and leave the rest. If what's being told to you is not it's not really resonating, don't force it. Go somewhere else. Keep moving until you find what works for you and resonates with you. That doesn't mean that it's like a concept in general that you may not agree with resonating on an energetic level, because the soul truth, there's only so many variations of the truth that you
Well,
can find.
you know, the soul's the best lie detector. The soul can detect bullshit right away. It's just if we're the less clear we are, the harder it is to detect that. But the more clear we are, the more our bullshit meter kind of goes off and knows the thing. But yeah, that's where it's really like, if you're, the spiritual stuff's always going to go beyond our mind. So somebody said this in a podcast the other day, which it just clarifies this perfectly. He met his teacher. His mind told him, I don't have the money. I don't want to do this. It's this, that, whatever. But his soul was telling them, do this. It was, you know, and he trusted that. He followed it. He's like, it wasn't logical at all. He's like, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have the money. I didn't have the money. I didn't have the time. I didn't want to do it the way the guy was telling me, because the teacher that's going to move you forward is never going to come to your level to justify your stuff and because that's where you're stuck. A teacher that's going to elevate you is always going to challenge your thoughts, fears, beliefs, and it won't make sense.
For
But,
sure.
you know, I think that's a really good point. Beyond what I said about the questions, it's like, beyond the mind, is there a feeling of, yes, this feels like, on a soul level, does this feel like this is my next step in my
Mm-hmm.
progression?
Mm-hmm. You'll know, even if it's scary or there's like an excitement and scariness to it, you'll be able to feel if that's where you're supposed to go next.
Yeah.
But learning how to trust that feeling is an art. It's a muscle, and that's an art and a lesson in and of itself.
Yeah, but that's what spiritual teachers are for. It's not to force things down your throat and tell you how it is. It's to give you new potentials and things to look at in context, to to see the unseen. And with that, you build your own discernment, you build your own inner guidance. It's not to force you down a path of submission. It's a path of empowerment to give you the tools to, you know, experience and gain knowledge and wisdom yourself. Because then that becomes truly who you are, not just not this power outside of yourself, just forcing a certain way, you know.
Right. And I mean, you've been doing submission. That's why you're here at this, the fork in the road. You know what I mean? So you can
That's a
either
really
continue
cool.
doing what you've been doing or try something else, take a leap of faith, so to speak.
That's what it is. Yeah, it's like you can't help somebody that can't help themselves, and it's sort of a sad. You know, somebody's like, well, "What's the worst part about being a guide?" It's like not being able to help people that don't want to help yourself themselves.
Hmm.
Like, I can't force this on anybody. It's like they have to be willing
Yeah.
to, you know, I feel honored when somebody trusts me to take them to the next level, but they need
Hmm.
to take that leap. You know,
Yep.
it's like
Totally.
that's the thing. It's the thing. Just throw themselves into it, and you know, you'll learn and grow and progress. But that's the only way. It can't. It's there's no growth in stagnation. And, you know, you have to throw yourself in at some points in life to experience that next thing.
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
yeah, we went all the way from you being a minister to, you know, sacredness of marriage to healing journeys to, is there anything before we wrap this up that you want to, you know, leave people with, or maybe a little nugget of something to inspire, to clarify, to, you know,
If something is on your heart, as cheesy as it sounds, if something is in your heart and fueling you, it's there for a reason. So even if you can't see how that's going to happen, use the passion and the fuel that you have to fuel your way forward. And you may have to take leaps of faith to get there. You may have to go on an inner journey to get there, but that doesn't mean you won't get there. You're being prepared every step of the way, because the challenges that you go through are actually what you're going to help other people go through, even if it's in a different way. You have to be able to help guide people, and you can't guide people if you don't have any experience, knowledge, wisdom in order to do that. So if things feel like they're going uphill for you right now, this is a moment in time. This is the preparation. You stick with that, and it's put on your heart for a reason.
Love it. I think that's awesome. I think that's a good, you know, everything we've been talking about the spiritual path is really like tune into yourself, trust yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and take that leap of faith to go to the next level. No matter how many stories, traumas, whatever you have, there's always a next step. There's always another piece, link in the chain. Awesome. That was great. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
inviting. Pleasure.